In this series, we cover the many products, promos, and pack-ins available to support Dungeon Masters and players within the world of Eberron. And in this video, I'm covering more miniatures created for grid-based role-playing of characters and monsters over the many iterations of the game by Wizard of the Coast and licensees like Wizkids and Gale Force 9. This is the Eberron Collector. Dwarves. They're the bearded, stout stone and metal workers of the mountains, right? In Eberron, yes and no. Dwarves are one of the species that are core to D&D, that have their general role in the world least changed when making the transition into the world of Eberron in many respects. Most character concepts can be brought over on a one-to-one basis. Dwarves in Eberron have an origin in prehistory that is mostly unknown. There are theories, though, that they first emerged in the polar regions of the Frostfell and built great underground kingdoms in Khyber before emerging in the Ironroot and Hoarfrost mountains of northern Khorvaire, as well as mountains in the Tashana tundra in Sarlona. We're focusing on the dwarves of Khorvaire here. Culturally, dwarves mine, craft fine metalwares, and are master mations and all of that. The men are generally bearded and take pride in their facial hair, and dwarves do focus their martial prowess towards fighting with weapons that could also be used for craft, so axes, hammers, and picks. So far, we might be describing the dwarves of almost any D&D setting. Dwarves in Eberron add the archetypes of wealthy mining and banking barons to their oeuvre. Plus, Rising from the Last War added a new dimension to dwarves by having some members of Dragomir society embracing the use of symbiotes taken from their enemy the Dalkir. These themes were expanded upon, as well as more cultural elements of the Dragomir, like the role of legends and tall tales as an important glue to their clans in the Exploring Eberron book. As for miniatures, at least so far, little of these unique Eberron elements of dwarves specifically have been applied to what miniatures we have available for Eberron dwarves. Though there are some other Eberron elements that have been overlaid on dwarves in general, which is understandable as dwarves are an integrated part of the Five Nation societies. Let's take a look. Khorvaire's economy is one that relies on widespread usage of simple magic. This is what allows Khorvaire to have many of the conveniences that the people of the real world take for granted, like mass-produced goods, street lamps, and indoor lighting. Thus, Eberron has a profession of low-level magic users who do small magical tasks that are just generally useful. A Kenneth Tinker might know only one spell, the Mending spell, but she would use it multiple times a day, in between working directly with regular tools in the course of the craft. There are Magewright tailors, chefs, carpenters, apothecaries, and even things like augurs and magical translators. Our first dwarf is a Magewright, showing off some sort of magical tool, perhaps a gyroscope or similar. She has a stylish mohawk and an absolutely loaded tool belt. She is almost definitely associated with some sort of craft. The miniature is correctly medium-sized on a 1-inch base, as normal for D&D, as well as the rest of the miniatures that are going to be in this video. It was released as a common in 2020's Eberron Rising from the Last War set, from within the Dungeons & Dragons Icons of the Realms line from Wizkids. Magewrights have a full NPC class in 3.5, and had a lot of variation, including a variety of stat blocks for different economic fields that they might work within. That was a web supplement on the Wizards of the Coast website. In 4th edition, there was a 6th level stat block for a House Kenneth Magewright specifically, that was in the Eberron campaign guide. And Eberron Rising from the Last War has an NPC stat block for Magewrights as well, and this miniature is directly modeled after the illustration for that NPC by Sam Kaiser. Veneration of the gods of the sovereign host is widespread in all nations of Khorvaire, from the Shadow Marches to the Lazar principalities, and that includes people of all races and stations in life. Wherever physical force is needed, either to lift a heavy weight, smite a foe in battle, or outrun a pursuer, Dol Dorn is there. He is the sovereign of strength and steel, and is the patron of athletes, fighters, and every other job that requires pure muscle. Dol Dorn is said to have two siblings, Dol Arrah, the sovereign of honorable combat, and Dol Azor, usually called the Mockery, who is the sovereign of betrayal and bloodshed. Together they are three aspects of war, and most warriors do heed at least one, or sometimes even all three of them. This dwarf is one who has accepted Dol Dorn's call for perfection of body, and become his champion. The miniature was included in the 2007 Dungeons & Dragons miniature game set Night Below, and was an uncommon. His stat card has a nice little bit of flavor text. Dol Dorn is Eberron's god of strength at arms. His worshippers aspire to physical prowess and perfection. Though, as you can see on the card, the skirmish game had the champion in its lawful good faction, when Dol Dorn is actually aligned as chaotic good, though Eberron in no way enforces a paladin or cleric and their god to share alignments. On the role-playing side of the card, you can see the champion is a cleric 2 and fighter 7. I like to imagine that this dwarf was an experienced fighter in the last war, but something on the battlefield gave him an epiphany and got him closer to his patron god, at which point he started training as a cleric. There is no specific piece of art from a book that this miniature was based upon, but the concept art was done by Des Hanley. The Mrorholds, the homeland nation for dwarves in Khorvaire, was an integral part of the Kingdom of Galifar. But as the last war broke up that kingdom, the dwarves struck off on their own, freed from their pledges to King Galifar I. From there on, many outside nations saw the Mror as mostly profiting from the war through banking and providing the belligerent nations raw materials, and for the most part, missing the majority of the depredations of the 100 Years' War. But that is not altogether true. The dwarves of the Holds were fighting a parallel war, just one beneath their feet. In the early part of the current century, shortly after the breakout of the last war, dwarven miners and underground explorers found remains of an ancient underground dwarven kingdom, thought just to be a legend by some at that point. But they also found ancient alien evil, the forces of the Dalkir, who had destroyed the underground realm of treasures and wonders from the dwarven past. From then on, aberrant forces almost continually attacked outposts of dwarves. Waves of Dolgaunts and Dolgrims, or even worse things, destroyed whole Mror colonies. And thus at this point, all Mror dwarves now receive weapon training to ensure that they can defend themselves if there is an attack. By now, the forces of the Dalkir have been quelled to the state of stalemate, and attacks have slowed. But the Iron Council of the Holds knows at any time war could break out in full again. This miniature is a Dwarf Raider. She could be one of those called to defend her home against those attacks, or someone going into the realm below looking for ancient treasures. Though you might be asking me why this miniature is here in this video. It's a pretty generic female dwarf warrior. It's not based on any art from an Eberron book, doesn't have any Eberron specific names or anything like that, but let's look at its role-playing stat card. As you can see, there's a bit of text down at the bottom there, saying that this miniature has been approved for use with the RPGA Mark of Heroes campaign. Mark of Heroes was an organized play initiative about getting people to play in Eberron. There were adventures available that could be played for conventions or in-store play, one of which was actually written by Keith Baker, and characters were tracked between different adventures and dungeon masters. One option for this was to choose a fast play character, to fill in if your character had died or just didn't fit in with the rest of the party, and miniatures were tied in with these fast play characters. This specific miniature was for a Dwarf Fighter character and appeared in the 2005 D&D miniatures game set Angel Fire as a common. The concept art used to create the mini was illustrated by Jim Nelson. There are 12 dwarven clans in the Roar Holds, each with different characters, roles, and stereotypes within that nation. But one clan, Kundurark, only has an observer role on the governing Iron Council. That is because, originally, they were the wardens keeping the rest of the dwarven exiles from returning to their former underground kingdom. And later, not long after the formation of the Realm of Galifar, they became the 11th Dragomir house once it was discovered that the underground kingdom was no more, and their vigil was over. Their Dragomir gives them powers over magical wards, barriers, and other things useful for security. This house has meant a lot of dwarven arcane innovation, has involved things within Kundurark's purview, especially around banking. This Dwarf Wizard could be seen as a Dwarf Arcanist working for House Kundurark's banking arm, as he is holding a coin aloft. But there's no iconography or anything else Eberron specific about him. Again, we're looking at another Mark of Heroes fast play character, as you can see on the role-playing side of the stat card. Starting with the previous Death Knell set, miniatures were designated on the stat card for having this tie to Eberron. A number of miniatures from earlier sets were retroactively added as fast play characters as well, but as you can see on this example from that list, their stat cards are not marked with this. I don't personally count them as quote-unquote Eberron miniatures in any sense, unless they would otherwise fit the description by using game mechanics, illustrations, or world elements from an Eberron book. Like the last miniature, the wizard is from the Angel Fire set, but was an uncommon. Wizards of the Coast did have a promotional repaint available as a D&D player rewards giveaway. Unfortunately, I don't owe one to show you a full turnaround video of it, but it has the exact same sculpt, just repainted into a different color scheme and has a different label on the base. Otherwise, it was completely identical. Artificers are a feature of Eberron that helps it reflect the nature of wide-use magic. Artificers are the innovators at the top, creating magic items that drive the leading edge of arcane engineering, not the ones keeping the economy of Corvair running. Those, of course, are the Magewrights. Artificers have been introduced into D&D through Eberron in 3.5, 4th, and 5th editions. Though in both 4th and 5th editions, they were embraced by the core D&D soon afterwards, as they do work great in other D&D worlds as well. While this Dwarf Artificer was also a Mark of Heroes fast play character, it did actually use the Artificer class as it appeared in the Eberron campaign setting as well, making it, in my mind, a fully realized Eberron miniature. It was included as an uncommon in 2005's Death Knell D&D miniatures game, set from Wizards of the Coast. For RPG sessions with the fast play characters, you did gain a special additional bonus for playing when you had the actual miniature for the fast play character, as you can see in this snippet from the official Mark of Heroes character sheet for the fast play character. As for the miniature, it is based on concept art made for the Eberron campaign setting before final art was commissioned for the first book, which has only really been shown, other than on the stat card, in Dragon number 315 in an Eberron preview article. That art was done by Steve Prescott, though you can see more of it on the stat card than you can in the original magazine art. So while Artificers are a core element of Eberron, you might expect that Dwarven Artificers to be central in the class as Eberron races go, based on their role in other settings as the best craftspersons. But in a subversion of that trope, Keith Baker and the original Eberron design team decided to focus more on House Cannith and humans as the central Artificer race in Eberron. Not that there are no Dwarven Artificers. There are a few Master Crafters making magical armors and weapons in the Roar Holds, and House Kundarark definitely has had Artificers to help develop their magic technologies, but even their largest innovation, the magically linked safe deposit boxes, where a deposit into one vault made at any branch can be retrieved at any other branch elsewhere in Corvair, required the assistance of not just Cannith, but also House Orion to construct. This is the last miniature we're covering, which is another Dwarf Artificer, this time from the Wizkids Icons of the Realms 2020 set, Eberron Rising from the Last War, where it was a common. This miniature is a direct representation of this illustration from Steve Prescott. The set also has the winged Iron Defender in it, featured in the art. This mini will of course be featured in a future video, so get subscribed to make sure you don't miss it. This art, strangely, was not used in the Eberron Rising from the Last War book, but I suspect there was an intention to use it at one point at least, for the miniature to actually get the clearance to appear in the set by Wizards of the Coast. So that's the last item we're digging up in this Eberron Archaeologist episode. All of the miniatures shown are great, with above average sculpts and paint jobs, with the exception of the older Dwarf Artificer, which in my opinion has a bit of a cartoonish face, and its body's paint job could use a little more detail to complement the detailed texture of the hide armor he is wearing. Since all of them are commons and uncommons, even the older miniatures are still quite affordable on the secondary market as singles. Thanks so much for watching this video, and please let me know what miniatures, items, or some other type of artifact you might want me to look into in a future video by leaving a comment. The next video I'm planning on doing is a new Kornberg Library episode covering Valinor animals, so please subscribe so you don't miss it.